So my name is Kimberly O'Neil. I am the founder of Cause Studio, which is an initiative of Giving Blueprint. The Giving Blueprint is a social innovation consultancy. We work with for-profit, government, and nonprofit organizations and helping them to scale their individual businesses. About 5 years ago, a little over 5 years ago, I started an organization called Cause Studio. We started that as a nonprofit organization, and our goal was to fill a deficit within the marketplace. What we saw was there were a lot of programs set and established to train nonprofit leaders. But what I often realized as I was training people is there was nothing that was available for our newer nonprofit leaders. So people that have a heart for service, people that actually do have a really amazing solution, but they didn't have anywhere to go to help them to understand, okay, so I filled out this nonprofit paperwork and now I have a nonprofit, but what am I supposed to do? And so there was this gap between those individuals that founded organizations and organizations that were they were small, but they were established where someone can go and get training and then bring that training back to their office, and then with someone that would help them with the on-the-job training portion of it. And so we transitioned last year from a nonprofit structure into a for-profit structure for Cause Studio with the goal of being able to provide training to individuals across the country, no matter where you were. Originally, we designed this to be an incubator, and the incubator was based out of North Texas. And so we were limited in who we could serve unless we were doing live events. And we've done live events in Atlanta and Washington, DC, definitely throughout North Texas. And then I have traveled and done additional training throughout the country. So what I wanted to do tonight was really just talk about the heart of budgeting. Budgeting for me is one of the most important things that you need to be able to really maximize and be able to create for your nonprofit organization. And so this is part one. We have a masterclass series, and this part of the series is on budgeting 101. So this is on how to prepare for your first budget. Many organizations create budgets and they're done based on estimates, but they're not really done with the true science and the math that needs to go behind creating a budget. And so I wanted to do a workshop just on how you prepare before you put those numbers together. What are the things that you need to do? And so we're going to go through our time tonight, and we're going to go through as much as we can tonight, answer as many questions as I can for you. And then I'll also tell you about what we're doing for the next parts of our Budgeting 101 series. For those of you for today, if you utilize social media, please feel free to follow us at Cause Studio, and then myself personally at Just Kim Online, anywhere on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, any place, TikTok. We haven't started using it, but we have them. But connect with us, use our hashtag NPO Masterclass. Please share our information. The reason I do this is not because I ever wanted to really train nonprofits, but I believe in community and I believe in providing resources for people like me who have created solutions for something they thought was missing. And I want to make sure that we get that information out to as many people as possible. A little bit about my background. I'm the founder of Cause Studio. We are 5 years old, and it sits under the initiative of Giving Blueprint, which is a 10-year-old consulting company that I founded right as I was transitioning out of the government world. I am a 30-year veteran in the nonprofit and the local government space. I've worked along the East Coast to the Mid-Atlantic and ended my quote-unquote government career in the city of Fort Worth, and that's how I got to Texas. But I've also done a lot of extensive work leading nonprofit organizations and also helping businesses, nonprofit organizations to just kind of restructure and get themselves together. One of the amazing things that I think that I'm really proud of with Cause Studio is that we've been able to take organizations that literally came into our door, never have raised a dollar, and we've been able to help a lot of organizations scale to six-figure budgets in less than a year or two. Some of our organizations have gone on to be able to raise more than $500,000. Since our existence, we've been able to help organizations that were direct clients of ours be able to raise collectively more than $1 million in cash, and probably about $250,000 to $300,000 in kind. And so there's a science behind the work that I do. And one of the things that I always say is that when we're talking about running and building nonprofit organizations, we are building businesses that just happen to be charities, right? When we are building our nonprofits, we are building businesses first that just happen to be charities. And through this business initiative, we're doing good for the community. And I think it's important that we kind of shift our thinking. A lot of times when we're thinking about nonprofit organizations, we think about the passion and the do good work first. And when we lead with that without leading with order, and making sure our foundation is solid, what we end up doing is working in more of a hobby-driven kind of initiative that never gains the momentum and traction that it should, even if it deserves it. I have run a city before. I've managed budgets in excess of $33 million. So when it comes to numbers, if there is one part of training people about nonprofits that I get excited about, and I'm probably the most anal about, it's about building budgets all together. And so I want to share what I've learned and what I've done, my proven methods, and just in the preparation process just for today. And I hope that the information that I share with you is not only eye-opening, but that you can take the information and that you can apply it immediately. So for today, our agenda, we're going to talk about the common nonprofit budget issues. We're going to talk about the importance of streamlining your budget process. We're going to talk about how do you actually prepare for the process. So before you actually start putting numbers in an Excel spreadsheet, how do you actually get to the point that you are prepared for the process? We're going to talk about some post-webinar action items, so things that you can do immediately. This is a free call. For those of you that are on the call tonight, this is a free call. Once we finish with this tonight, it will be uploaded to our training portal, and then it'll be a nominal cost, but we're going to make it available for you all at least for a week to kind of go through the information again, take some additional notes that you may have missed tonight, and then it will be available in our online portal at cost. But for those of you that are on the call tonight, you will have access to this information for at least 7 days at no cost. And then again, I'll leave the time for question and answers at the very end. And so I like to start off by saying this when we're talking about, but there are two things. One, when the government doesn't have an approved budget, think about what has happened 2 times over the past several years. If the federal government does not have an approved budget by the beginning of their fiscal year F-I-S-C-A-L, fiscal year, for those of you that are not really familiar with the term, fiscal year means the financial operating year. So January to December is the standard calendar year, but not every nonprofit operates financially on a calendar year. So every organization has the opportunity to pick their starting month for their financial operating year or their fiscal year and the ending month. And so for the federal government, the fiscal year is October 1 through September 30th. So what that means is on October 1st at midnight, if there is not an approved budget for this country, approved by Congress, not the president, this government shuts down. We cannot move forward without, in terms of running the business of our government, without a financial projection of what we're supposed to spend, how we're supposed to spend it, and what kind of money we're taking in. And so I like to start off the budgeting process for nonprofits the same way. If you do not have an approved budget, an approval for your budget legally means that your board of directors has got to approve your budget. If you do not have an approved budget in place at midnight on the day that that starts your fiscal year, your organization shouldn't be running. Right? And so that's why this part of the process, this part of the conversations, it's amazing to want to do really great programs, but if the money is not there or the projections for the money isn't there, you shouldn't be operating because you're operating out of order. When you think about building a house has a foundation. Your budget and all of your administrative responsibilities, policies, and insurances, those things are part of your foundation. You cannot build a second floor until your first floor is solid. Because if you don't have a solid first floor, your second floor, it doesn't stick to anything. And so your budget is part of your first floor. It actually is the ground for the cement for the entire first floor. And then all of your administrative pieces get placed on top of that. And then your programs and all of the wonderful mission-driven things that you do, that sits on top, and that's your second floor, and you continue to build up from that perspective. And so we want to focus on that. And then I'll also start with a little story, because we're in this coronavirus, and I hope that everybody is doing well. I know that this is a really, really hard time for everybody, but it is really catastrophic for the nonprofit sector. So my heart and my prayers are with all of you that are considered essential social services and are still providing services despite what's happening around us. For those, I know Amarimba's in New York, it's a very different climate when it comes to coronavirus than those of you that are in Texas right now. Texas is really starting to catch up to where the Northeast has already been, and California, in terms of the severity and the shutdowns, but this is impacting our sector across the board. And that's why this session was rescheduled from 2 weeks ago, because I thought it was more important to talk about crisis management plans for smaller nonprofits that may not have ever thought that we would be in this position. I thought that was more important than the budget, because that was a more immediate need. So again, thank you for those of you that have that just kind of stuck around with me for 2 weeks until we got this back on the calendar. So these are our questions, our agenda items for today. When I ran a nonprofit in Washington, D.C., those of you that were on the call with me 2 weeks ago, or just know my story, or if you're on my email list and you saw the email that I sent out earlier in the week or over the weekend that said I lost $1 million. True story. I took over a nonprofit organization in Washington, D.C. in the early 2000s, and immediately upon accepting the offer, there was a war happening overseas. And if you know anything and pay attention to anything around government, you know that we are a superpower of the United States, and that when there are catastrophic events happening around the country, we do respond, even if it's not our war. Well, when that happens, it's expensive. And we had gotten $1 million multi-year grant for $1 million, $333,000 a year for 3 years. And that was an award. So we had the award letter. They had started funding us. With those funds, we were able to expand our programs and our services. This was part of our budget. We were able to expand our programs and services for affiliate organizations that we had around the country. We actually paid 50% of the executive director salary. So these weren't even our employees. These were just organizations that followed our method and our programs and services. And our agreement, when we got that money for 3 years, we would cover 50% of the salaries for the executive directors, which was an amazing thing. But overnight, we got a letter that said that that award was being rescinded because those funds were being redirected back into the federal government, to the Department of Defense. And I don't know if you can understand how devastating that is, to have that money, to not have to think about raising over $300,000 a year for 3 years, because this is quote unquote guaranteed, and then to lose it and then have to figure it out. Well, when I started, we had just moved into a new office building, had just retrofitted the office, new furniture, just expanded our programs. And overnight, we moved out of that space, moved into the second floor of a dentist who his childhood home he turned into an office building. We rented the second floor. Our staff of 15 in the administrative office went to a staff of 3, which included me. And our centers that we ran went from 5 to 3. And immediately we had to stop giving the 50% reimbursement to the salaries to our affiliate organizations around the country. It was devastating. One of the things that really worked for us in our favor was that we were able to have some reserve funding in a savings account. So once we reduced our expenses, we were able to carry through with our expenses, which was great. But the realistic part of it is most nonprofits don't have that. And so let's kind of talk about some of the common nonprofit budget related issues. Some of the issues that we're seeing across the nonprofit sector, especially with our newer, smaller, what I like to call startup nonprofits, is that when budgets are created, budgets are not based on goals or outcomes. Somehow people sit down and just say, I need $100,000, but they never break down what that $100,000 is supposed to cover. It's not based on the overall goals and outcomes of the organization. So if you have 3 programs, what are the outcomes that you plan to see for for your organization and for those programs at the end of the year? You always start with the end in mind. Right? And if you start with the end in mind, then you can backtrack and say, what do I need to get to that end? And so most of the time we see budgets that are not based on goals or outcomes, and that people don't even know how to explain their goals or outcomes. Another problem that we see is that budgets, the financials of the organization, their estimates, and a budget is a projection, right? So a budget is what we expect to spend and what we expect to bring in to cover those numbers. But the numbers should be based on something, and it has to be based on research. And so another issue that we're seeing is that our budget projections in the nonprofit sector, especially for smaller organizations, for people that have never done this before, that the estimates are done without doing any type of research on what things cost, what are the needs. Sometimes I'll ask organizations when I'm helping to create budgets or modify budgets, I start asking questions. Well, why do you need this? And people can't answer that for me. Or why did you put $10,000 when I know it only costs $1,500? Well, it's because they just thought it would cost $10,000. So they're done without any type of research, which is really catastrophic for a budget. Budgets are often, especially for those of you that are founders for an organization that you created not too long ago, you may not be paid. You may be sitting in the executive director, CEO seat, as well as the chair. That's a whole nother conversation, chair of the board. But the budgets are created without board review and approval. And one of the things that you all really need to hear is that your board of directors are the most responsible people in terms of the legal aspects. They are responsible for what happens in that organization. And so I recently stepped down from a position as chair of a board. And I used to say that repeatedly. It doesn't matter if founders are in the room. As chair of a board, I have the most legal responsibility. I hold the most liability in the organization. And if something were to happen within the organization, the first person they're going to come to in terms of the IRS or anyone that's filing a lawsuit, it's not the founder, it is not the executive director, it is the board chair. And so when we're thinking about our budgets, the budget should never be created without board review. So the board has to understand the numbers, and they also have to approve the numbers as well. There's no formal timeline for development of the budget. That's another issue. So when people create their budgets, if their fiscal year starts on January 1st, somewhere in December 1st or 5th, they start putting a budget together. But realistically, I don't care if you have a $50,000 a year budget or a $500,000 a year budget. No budget should be created that quickly. There's a process for reviewing it, and then there's a process for approving it, and then there's some steps that come after that as well. So there are no formal timelines for developing a budget. We also see that there's confusion in expense categories. A lot of times when I look at budgets, especially when I'm doing grant reviews, I do a lot of grant reviews. I've done grant reviews for the federal government. I do it right now for the city of Plano in Texas. I do it I've done it and do it for nonprofit organizations as well. I look at the expense. When I look at the expenses, there's so much confusion that people don't really understand what is a programmatic expense, what's considered an administrative expense, meaning the operations, what should be in that category, and then what's considered a fundraising expense. A fundraising expense or expenses can be considered an administrative expense, but sometimes it's easier to break them into 3 different categories where you have everything related to program, and then your expenses divided by programs, your expenses that are in alignment with your administration, those that are operational, meaning your day-to-day responsibilities that don't get charged to a program. And then the last category being a fundraiser, because we have to make sure when we're budgeting that we're not putting a lot of money into fundraising and taking a lot of money out of program if we're not able to spend a lot of money and bring a lot of money back in. There's no understanding of when income is needed. And so when people create budgets, they say, I need $10,000 a year. And then I say, but when do you need the $10,000, right? Do you need the $10,000 the first month of your fiscal year? Do you need $2,000 every 2 months? Because how you develop your strategy for bringing in income should be based on when you need the funding for to cover your expenses. So people don't know. They just say, I need $100,000 to get through the year. Well, how much of that do you need during the first quarter? How much of it do you need during the second quarter? And then when during the second quarter do you need what percentage of what? So when budgets are being developed, people are not looking and saying, so I know I need $100,000. I know those are the numbers that I need, but I've not documented when I need the money. And so that's just as important. There's no justification, as I mentioned before, there's no justification for income and expenses. Every single line item in your budget should be justified. There's a running joke about me in the nonprofit and in the government sector. I am known as the woman who will question why we're spending $500 on pens, especially in a technology-driven climate like we're in now. I want to know why we're spending that much on pens. And when people tell me because people walked out with them, well, that's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to make sure that you have the resources that you need. Now, you need to be more innovative in figuring out how the pens don't walk out once I get them for you, because we cannot continue to spend $500 on pens every 2 to 3 months when we're not a paper and pen based organization. And so you have to understand why every single dollar is being spent in your organization. You as the person, if you are the primary person that's responsible for drafting the budget and the board for approving the budget, and your CFO or whoever serves in that, whether it's in-house or an external person, you all need to be so familiar with those numbers that if someone says, you said you needed $15,000 for A, B, or C, you should be able to break down why. And then another problem that we see, and this is a huge one, is that you're not including, nonprofits rarely include internal stakeholders in the budget development process. And when I say internal stakeholders, I don't simply mean the executive director and CEO, CFO, and the board, but if you have people that are running your programs and services, whoever those leaders are should be part of the process. If they are running something on a day-to-day basis with you, they should be included in the process and in a discussion at some point to talk about what the wants, the needs, and the wishes are of the organization. And they all go back to the very first point that I brought up. The very first point is that all of this should be in alignment with your goals and your outcomes for the organization for that year. I'll just put a little asterisk here and say, if your organization does not have at least a 3 to 5 year strategic plan, that's one of the things that you probably want to have done in the organization, even if it's just basic. And that's also something that you do with the administration and the board. But your goals and outcomes of every year should be based on a long range projection. So your strategic plan is a long range projection of where the organization needs to go over a certain time period. 3 to 5 years is typically the time frame. And then every year, then you develop your goals and your outcomes in alignment with the strategic plan that is already the long range plan for the organization. Then your annual outcomes and goals should be based on the things that you need to do to move forward in that strategic plan. And internal stakeholders need to be involved in that process too. But a lot of times we go so high up in the organization, or if we're really, really small, we don't involve people. If you don't have a robust organization with a lot of employees, maybe look at some of your key volunteers that are helping you with execution and bring them into the process, because they will be able to tell you what they need when they're helping to do the mission-driven work. And you want to make sure that you have that. When I was a city manager, when I was executive director, CEO of the nonprofit, I never ever did a budget without first talking to the people that worked to support the work that I was doing. Because at the end of the day, my performance plan was based on our goals and outcomes And then their performance plans were based on what my goals and outcomes were that were required by my leaders. And so we didn't go from the bottom up, we went from the top down. All of the work starts with a strategic plan. It goes into your annual plan, and then you start doing performance from the top down. And the people at the lowest end of the organizational chart are responsible for the day-to-day things that help to elevate the entire organization, but you don't start with them, you end with them, right? All right, so let's talk about the importance of streamlining the process. When I talk about streamlining the process, it means what kind of order do you need in order for this to work well? And I will go back to the very beginning. Nothing functions without a solid budget. Nothing functions, let me add, well, without a solid budget. Because if you all never really had a decent budget process, you might be functioning, but you might not be functioning well. Not functioning well means you're relying on too many grants. Not functioning well means that you're not on salary, but you're doing 40 hours worth of work. Not functioning well means if you had to cut expenses, you don't know what's required versus what is nice to have, and you should be able to do that. Not functioning well means that you wake up one day and realize, oh, we didn't allocate an expense for this. We forgot to allocate expenses for our insurance that we're required to have. So not functioning well means that you don't have everything that you need because you've not planned out everything you need to deliver your programs and services with excellence, and you've not identified what's our bare bones, what do we have to have, and then what are the things that we add on top of that, and then what are those the wishes. So sometimes we can get to a point, not just our wants but our wishes. Some of the wishes are those, the fantasy things that we actually want. So nothing functions well without a solid budget and a solid budget process. The importance of streamlining is that it establishes some level of order too. A lot of times, I just had a conversation with someone in a nonprofit, and I made some recommendations, and they told me, when they first started it, they would not have been as open to my recommendations as they were with the recommendations that I just provided. And I think it's when you start going through things, when you start an organization, especially when you're the founder of a nonprofit organization, you lead with your heart, right? And it's not a lot of order. And it's not that it's anyone's fault, because no one really teaches this, right? Who teaches you about building a budget? Who teaches you about how to prepare a budget? It's not really one of those things that we teach to everybody in the sector. We tend to leave that for just the financial related people, and that's not fair. Everyone who has any level of responsibility, from your entry level people to your administrative staff, everybody who touches a budget in any way needs to understand the roles and responsibilities. When I took over the organization in Washington, D.C., they were used to taking all of the kids on what was called a mystery trip every single year. That means that the kids had to do well throughout the entire school year. And at the end of the school year, if they had done well and earned enough credit, they got a free ticket to go on a trip on a plane someplace. Well, I told you we lost $333,000 a year, which meant the mystery trip my very first year changed. This was the first year that they were not getting on a plane. These kids would get on a plane and they end up in Florida or California or someplace with a trip that lasted 3 or 4 days, all expenses paid. And this was the first year that we were going to do the mystery trip, but we were not doing it like we did it before. And I gave them a budget of $12,000. $12,000 to take 3 centers of children on a trip overnight for several days. $12,000 is not a lot of money. And then I said, well, you're going to have to take a bus, and not even a charter bus. We're going to have to get school buses to go. And there's a limit on how far we can go, because there's a limit on how far a school bus can go. And it was such a shock to staff that they kept giving me all of these really great ideas. And I kept saying, financially, that's just not in the budget. You have $12,000. Figure it out, or you all don't go. And from that point forward, what I realized is that that staff had never been involved in understanding how much it truly costs to send these children on a trip every year, that we could not afford to pay $30,000 to $40,000 for a 3 to 4 day trip for children anymore. We could not, unless an airline was donating every last ticket, we could not afford to get on a plane. And so that was the beginning for that team. That was the beginning of the process. I made sure everybody was involved, and it was like light bulb moments. Oh my gosh, that's a lot of money. Yes, it is a lot of money. And so we were able to start doing things, I feel, in a more responsible way, still ensuring that the kids had a great time, but making sure that we weren't breaking the bank and we could plan a little differently for the things that happened that we didn't plan for. We didn't plan to lose $333,000. We just did. It forces alignment, and to that point, it forces alignment across the organization because everybody gets to know about things a lot differently. It allows for formulation, implementation, and monitoring. A lot of times when we don't have a streamlined budget process, we don't have a true process to formulate, to develop the budget. We don't have a formal process for the implementation of the budget. And then we don't have a formal process for monitoring what happens along the way. And monitoring may come with some level of adjustments. It may come with some level of urgency because we need $30,000, but we've only gotten 25. And so we might need to look at how do we get this $5,000 in quickly. And then the last thing about the streamlining is it differentiates, I used the terminology before, it differentiates the needs, the wants, and the wishes. The needs are the things that you absolutely have to have. The wants are the things that make it a little bit easier to do the needs. And the wishes are the things that's the fairy tale land. Those are the things, if we had extra money, we had extra time, we had extra resources, we can do it, but it's not required. And it wouldn't necessarily enhance the work. Like a want, a wish is truly, I wish I could have it, but if I can't get it, then it's no big deal. My need, I have to have. If I don't have what I need, I can't do my job. And I want this other piece. I don't need it, but I want it because it will make my job a little bit easier. And so that's the priority. It's what does your organization need budgetarily? What does your team want that would make their needs a little bit easier? And then what are those glossy things that they just wish they would have so they could enhance the program, but it's not required to be able to do that? All right, let me go on to the next part, which how do we prepare for the process? And so this is where I think I may have about 3 slides on this part. I'm going to try and not talk as fast for this part because I want to make sure I'm explaining each of the points to the detail that I can for you. And so this is the part, if there are questions about this, jot them down, type them in the chat section, and then I'll make sure that I get to them when we start doing the Q&A in about 15 to 20 minutes. All right, so how do we prepare for the budget process? The first thing that you need to make sure is done is that there needs to be an established annual budget calendar and plan. What that means is there should be a document that says, so if you are on a January, let me just say, if you're on a January to December fiscal year, that means that at minimum 60 days before January 1st, your budget process should be done. Right? And so if now we're saying by October 30th, your budget for January 1st should be done, then now you backtrack. Remember, start with the end in mind. January 1st is your start date. 60 days before, because that's cushion, right? So 60 days, your calendar should say by October 30th of that year, the prior year, your budget for the following fiscal year should be done. So understanding your numbers and your research that you have to do, how far back should you go? A budget process is an ever evolving process. I would say allocate at least 3 months for the budget formulation part of the process. So when the administration, the people who are doing the work on the day-to-day are preparing a draft budget to give to the board. So just so that you understand that, the administration, the CEO, or executive director, whichever terminology that you're using, and his or her team should be developing the draft budget for the organization. That draft budget should then be handed off to the board chair and the board for review and evaluation, for questioning and approval. right? And so allocate at least 3 months for that entire process. Anyone that tells me they can get through a budget process, a true budget process in a week, they're not doing it well. Allocate at least 3 months, which now means if I said allocate 60 days as cushion, that means there's 5 months that the budget process should start 5 months before the first day of your fiscal year. All right. So if we're going back, that's December, November, October, September, and August. So if your budget starts on January 1st, that means by August 1st, your budget process should start. That would give you August, September, and October to work on, draft, and have that budget reviewed and approved, because there's other work that needs to happen before January 1st. This is not about fundraising, but what should come after an approved budget by your board is that whoever's responsible for fundraising and fund development for your organization should then look at the income that's attached to the budget and come up with a fund development plan. So they need some time to develop a plan before the first of the year starts, right? So that 60 days allows the rest of the organization to prepare for the beginning of that fiscal year. And so that's why you want to leave those 60 days, because there's still work that needs to be done if you want to do this well. All right. So you're going to establish a budget calendar and a plan on how this works for the organization. And you're going to allocate at least 3 months, because the organization is still running on a day-to-day basis. So leaving at least 60 days after the budget is approved and allocating at least 90 days to prepare the draft budget and have it reviewed and approved by the board makes sense. It means you're not rushed. It means you're not doing it every single day. And if I can just compare this to government, when I worked for the city of Fort Worth, I was the assistant director of the municipal court. My job was over administration. I was responsible for our budget. Our budget was $33 million. We spent $13 million, but we brought in $33 million. My job was to monitor and develop that budget. That was a 12-month process. So developing our budget, monitoring our budget, the implementation, identifying different ways to bring in revenue, making sure we covered all of the income that we were supposed to bring in. That was my job every day throughout the year. And so a budget is not just something that you do and it's done, because the process is about creating and implementing and monitoring over time so that the next year it gets better and it gets easier. The next one is next plan point is creating your annual goals and outcomes based on your strategic plan. I mentioned that as one of the challenges with nonprofit organizations, that they were not bringing in they were not aligning their goals and their outcomes with a strategic plan. Organizations that do well look at the end in mind. Where do I need to be within the next 3 to 5 years? And so now I have this roadmap I have these suggestions on how I'm going to get there. And every year I'm going to develop goals and outcomes to get to that point. You have to look far ahead. You cannot operate and a 12-month cycle for the life cycle of an organization. You have to say, where do we need to be to say that we're making improvements? Because if we really want to look at our mission-driven work, it's not just about helping people or helping things in our environment. It's truly, if we're doing our job well, we're talking about eradicating something, right? For most of us, when we do charitable work, the goal should be to eradicate something. Right? And so in 3 to 5 years, what can we do to eradicate something? It's probably not going to happen, but our work and our approach to it should be in that way. So we want to make sure that we're creating annual goals and outcomes. Goals do not have to be measurable, but your outcomes should be measurable, right? So they should be quantifiable, and they should be based on the strategic plan. The third point is you want to make sure that you outline a budget development committee for the board and the administration. So who are those internal stakeholders on the board that are going to be responsible for reviewing and approving? Is it the entire board? Is there a committee on the board? What do your bylaws say? But then equally as important is who, in support of the executive director or the president and CEO of the organization, who is going to help to draft the best budget for the organization. organization? Who do those people need to be? How often do you all need to meet on both sides, for the board and for the administration? Who needs to meet? How often do you meet? Do you bring in some external stakeholders as well? Do you want to create an advisory committee made up of volunteers for people that aren't on the board, that aren't part of the administration either, to help with this work? And so you want to outline who's on the budget development committee for both the board and for the administration, how often they're going to meet, what everyone's role and responsibility is going to be. I also think when you are outlining the budget development committee, it's important to identify a project manager on both sides. Who is the person that's going to ensure that everybody on the board and everybody in the administration, that everybody is going to adhere to the deadlines, so that you can stick to your calendar and your plan that you developed in point one. Another important thing when you're preparing, so we're talking about, I'm really doing this for people that have never prepared a budget before, but a lot of people who have never officially prepared a budget before have put together something for their organization. So what you also want to do is you want to review your prior expense and income projections and your actual. So the expense projections and actual, the terminology, projections mean if you're on a calendar year, you're currently in fiscal year 2020 from January 1 of 2020 to December 31st of 2020. Prior, if you did the process the way that I am talking about, you would have done your expense and your income budget projections in 2019. They would have been done by October 31st of 2019 to start on February 1st. So those are projections. Your budget is a projection, right? Your actuals are what actually is happening, right? So as of right now, everybody has actuals from January 1st to March 31st. So you want to look at your actuals for the current year, and you want to look at your actuals for the past year, the money you actually brought in, the money that you spent, at least for the past 2 to 3 years. I would say a minimum of 2. Sometimes if you've been around long enough, look at the 3 and look at your actuals to see where were the ebbs and flows. Are you able to bring in $500,000 a year? Are you able to bring in $100,000 a year? If you've never done it, never gotten close to it, what that means is the likelihood of you doing it without changing something significantly is slim to none. And so you want to look at your prior expenses and income projections and the actuals to see what did we say we were going to do and what did we end up doing. And and take off like the one-off things. I just needed to buy 5 computers one year. Well, you're not going to look at that again for the additional years unless you're actually looking at buying computers every single year. So you take off those one-off type of expenses, but then you look at what were we able to bring in and what were we able to, what did we say we were going to bring in, and what did we spend, and what did we say that we were going to spend. And so those are that's some of part of the research that you need to do before you even start putting together your numbers for the next year. You're also looking at what are the things that we spend every single year, that my justification for saying I need $10,000 is that for the past 2 years, that's exactly what we've spent, and our expenses stayed the exact same because it's a standing kind of figure. All right. We also want to then talk about reviewing your internal controls and policies for budgeting. So internal controls, each of you should have. You may not have them, but you should. And if you're on this call and you don't have internal controls, I'm also going to make an assumption that you've never had an audit. And depending upon what state you're in, your organization was founded in, you may or may not be required to have a nonprofit audit. I know Texas is not required. Nonprofits in Texas are not required to have an audit, but it makes it harder as your organization grows to not have an audit because it limits the type of funding that may be available to you. And I'm not sure, I know Amarimba's here from New York. I don't know, but I can also check to see if an audit is required. But if you don't have internal controls, I guarantee you've not gone through an audit process, because your internal controls are your rules, your regulations, your policies around finances, risk management, HR. These are the guidelines for the organization. And typically when you're going through an audit process, the auditor is going to ask to see, they're going to ask if you have them. and they're going to ask if you, have them, and then they're going to ask to see them, and they may kind of do some spot check on a few of them to see what those controls are. An example of an internal control that every one of you should have, and internal controls have to be written. An example of an internal control that each of you should have is, one is who picks up the mail, who opens the mail, and if there's a check, what that process, if there's a check or any donation that comes through the mail, what's the process for opening a check, documenting the check, creating the deposit slips for the check, and then who oversees the deposit. That should be written, right? You can't just say, oh, one person gets the mail, they open the mail, they pull out the check, they prepare the deposit slip, and then they deposit into the bank. Well, that's an audit finding. And so your internal controls should outline what this all looks like. And so what are your internal controls and your policies around a budget process? Do you even have any already? And if you don't have them, I'm going to jump down to the third bullet. If you don't have them, you need to create policies around your budget. So in addition to the plan, in addition to the calendar, you need to have some sort of written document that provides guidance to the board. It needs to provide guidance to the administration. It needs to provide guidance for the overall organization on how the budget is going to be created, why it's important, what your fiscal year is. And so it just outlines all of those things for you. You also, my strong recommendation is to use the Unified Nonprofit Chart of Accounts to organize your expenses. Many organizations have no idea what I'm talking about, but if you utilize QuickBooks or any other type of financial software, every line item, so salaries, payroll taxes, every item has a line that it fits in the budget. And the name and number that's associated with your financial record keeping system is considered your chart of accounts. My recommendation on using the Unified Nonprofit Chart of Accounts is because it outlines the expenses in alignment with the nonprofit IRS form 990, whether you're doing a 990 EZ or the full 990. The Unified Nonprofit Chart of Accounts aligns nicely with the reporting that you have to do annually for the IRS. For those of you that have never raised more than $50,000 a year, then you know the only thing you need to file every year is a 990-N, IRS form 990N. It's a postcard. You do it electronically. All you're doing is telling the telling the IRS that you haven't raised more than $50,000. But as soon as you raise more than $50,000, you're required to fill out longer forms. IRS form 990, for those of you that are on the call that don't know what that is, that's the equivalent of our personal tax forms, our 1040s that we provide to the IRS, but for the nonprofit sector. The only people that 501c3s that are exempt from having to do that are religious-based organizations. And then I mentioned this before, you start and finish the process at least 60 days before your fiscal year begins. That is super duper important because it allows you to prepare for the rest of the year, rest of the process for that year before the year actually starts. Make sure I got through all of them. Okay, great. So I'm gonna talk about some post-webinar action items that I want you all to do, and then we're gonna go straight into Q&A. It's 6:55 Central, 7:55 Eastern, so we have 20 after I finish this, we'll have like 30 minutes for Q&A, and so let's go on and get into it. Post-webinar action items. One, you're gonna develop a budget calendar, right? You're going to develop a budget calendar. I would recommend that you do some research on what are the different steps for the budget process that your organization needs to adopt, right? What makes sense to your organization. And so you're going to develop a budget calendar. That is important. I don't care if your fiscal year doesn't start until January 1st. Start this part of the process now so that by the time August, September comes around, that you're ready with a process so that you can have everything in place by October 31st. You can have someone create a fund development plan based on your approved income projections. And then on January 1st, you all are ready to go. Your second thing you're going to do is you're going to organize a meeting to establish rules around your budget process. So if you don't have anything, if your board doesn't have anything in their bylaws, if you don't have anything as it relates to internal controls, policies and procedures around budget, then you're going to organize a meeting with representation. Maybe it's your finance committee from your board, some key leaders from your team, your administrative team, and you all are going to sit down and talk about what are some of the frustrations that you've had with budgets or lack of budgets up until this point. And so you're going to put some rules around the budget process, what makes sense for your organization, and then you're going to draft that. You're going to put that in writing so that moving forward you have a checklist of things, and it doesn't have to be this long, lengthy document. It could be a checklist for right now. Here are the 25 things we need to do outside of the budget calendar. Here are the 25 things we need to do, and this is the order in which it needs to be done. And for right now, that's all you have. A checklist is fine as long as, because a checklist can be a process as well. Once you finish through this process and you draft it, make sure the board approves it. The board is ultimately responsible for the finances of the organization. They've got to approve the budget. And so they also should approve the budget calendar, and they should approve any of the policies that you're putting in place, not standard operating procedures that the administration might need to, but the overall process. The board should vote and approve it so that it becomes an official record for the organization. And then you're going to create the last thing you're going to do is you're going to create your budget board and administrative committee. So who from the board will sit on the budget review process committee? Is it the same group? Is it going to be everybody? If you have a small board, it probably will be everybody. But if you have a board with 11 people, you don't need 11 people to review the projections. You need 11 people to approve the voted in, but you don't need 11 people to review it. And so who on the board, what position titles on the board will sit on the committee for the board, and then who's the equivalent for the administration. And again, you can also consider, the board is open to it, consider an advisory committee. People that don't sit on the board, don't work within the organization, but have budget and finance experience that can come in, and they may be interested in volunteering. Maybe it's someone to help oversee the process for both the administration and for the board. And so who should be on that committee, that should also be documented as well. So those are the 4 things that you can immediately go away with today and work on: developing a budget calendar, establishing rules around your budget process, have your process drafted and reviewed and approved by the board, and then create the budget, the board committees for both the board of directors and for the budget committees for the board of directors as well as the administration. If you don't do anything else beyond this right now, this is a lot of work to do, because this is about preparing for the process. This webinar, I could not even begin to walk you through the developing of the budget process. We're actually developing a class that will launch soon on, it'll be a several month training process on taking people through the process of developing the expenditures, developing the income, balancing the budget, trying to establish whether you're a zero-based budget, if you're doing a zero-based budget, or if you are doing a surplus budget. A zero-based budget means that your income and your expenses, when combined, come to zero. A surplus budget means your income will be less than your expenses will be less than your income, and you will be left with a surplus to go into your bank account. And so there are some, it doesn't mean that when you have a zero-based budget that you won't have money going into your bank account, into a savings account. It just means that's within the budget. And so it's already in the budget that there's a line item that says $50,000 has to go into our rainy day fund, versus if you do a surplus base, if we have 50,000 extra, that $50,000 goes into our rainy day fund. So you get to decide what that looks like. All right, I'm going to open it up for questions and answers now. I'm going to bring up the chat so that I can see. And if you have any questions, please feel free. Excuse my desktop, because I don't know if you all can see that, but excuse my desktop because there's a lot going on here. But let's go into Q&A. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. And I am open to support you all in any way that I can. All right, I'm gonna stop my share. Give me 1 minute. And I'm going into chat. Are there any questions? Hi, April. Hi, Jerletha, Joe, Melanie, Terry. I know most of your names. I see. You're welcome, April. I'm so glad. For those of you that want to ask questions, I said in the beginning, make sure, one of the things I asked before, because I want to make sure we have them, in the chat section, just give me your name, the email address for your organization, any of your social media handles, and what city and state you are dialing in from, because that's really helpful. I want you all to, you're welcome, A. Marimba. You want to make sure that you all stay connected. Everybody that's on here, you all are startup nonprofits. For the most part, everybody here is a startup nonprofit founder. And I think one of the things that's really important within our sector is that I don't care where you are based. For those of you that are in North Texas, those of you that are in New York, I serve people that are in San Diego, I serve people that are in Austin. What's important is that you all begin to create your own network, and that you're able to kind of share resources across across the country. It doesn't need, you don't need to stay in a silo within your city. You have to think big in order to grow big. And sometimes growing and thinking big means that I'm not going to limit myself to engagement and networking and exchanging idea and resources with people that are only in my backyard, because sometimes someone else might be doing something that's way better than whatever we can do where we are right now. And you need to be able to reach out to them. So I'm asking you to share this information about yourselves, not just for me, but that you all can kind of see, you all can kind of connect. And yes, April, I do see your question. So yes, so this this session will be converted into an online training that will be put in our online training portal. But after tonight, I'm going to scrub it and make sure that it's clean, and that everybody can hear and see everything. I'm going to make it available to all of you for a week at no cost, and then it'll be converted and placed in our portal for people to download and watch on demand as they need it. So yes, it will, you will not miss anything. You will definitely be able to see the information. Are there any more questions? You're welcome, Ide. Is there a recommended number of committee members for smaller nonprofits? So Dania, I think I would say, if you're talking about the board, are you talking about, Dania, are you talking about just for the board committee members, or for the administrative side? Because I do think that there needs to be two. Yes, for the board. Okay, for the board, I would say at least 3 people. I always say keep an odd number, because if you want to have a really true process, you want to make sure that the board, the majority of the board, is in agreement with the recommendations, because what you want them to do is flush through all of the questions, ask you as the founder all of the questions, 3 of them. If you have a board of 5 or more people, you can say 3 people. You can even look at some advisory committee members to put on that. They're going to review the actual numbers and make any recommended changes, and then the more appropriate process is then those 3 people will then shift it out of committee. If at least there's 2 that agree on the final numbers, if you have a majority committee that agrees, then you provide it to the full board to vote it up or down. So I would say at least 3 people. And I would also make sure that those 3 people, to the extent that you can, one person has a good understanding of finance. Someone else just has someone that possibly has budget experience. Not everybody, and here's something, not everybody, your treasurer of your board is not necessarily going to automatically be your budget person. Finance and accounting, it's something separate from budget. And if you look at even government, your CFO is not always your budget person, right? So your finance and accounting people are the people that take care of the financials as it's happening. Your budget person and the people people that are experienced with budget, what they're knowledgeable about is how you put the expenses and income together, and your finance and administration people are responsible for actually capturing the information and making sure it's documented properly. So it's preferable that you identify, and if you don't have people on your board that are experienced in developing budgets, it doesn't matter if it's a nonprofit budget, corporate budget, or government budget. If they know how to put budgets together, they can adopt and adapt to creating a nonprofit budget. And sometimes when you have people that have worked with budgets outside of the nonprofit sector, they look at justifications a lot differently. And sometimes you need that. Nonprofit people tend to build budgets based on heart. People from government like me, I build budgets that are lean and solid, and corporations will do the same thing as well. On a grant process application, when they ask about our budget, should we report the budget authorized at the beginning of the fiscal year, even though the actual is showing a different? Yes. So with nonprofit budgets, when they ask you for your operating budget, they are asking you, when there's a few answers to this. So if they ask you for your operating budget, what they are asking you for are your projections for your income and your expenses. They're asking you for your full approved budget from the board. If they ask you for your program budget, then they're asking you for the projection. So they're still asking you about those numbers that were approved. When they ask you for your profit and loss statement, or they may ask you for your actuals to date, then they're asking for actuals. So for a budget process that I helped to revise, we asked for the budget for the current fiscal year. So the projections for 2020 that they did in 2019. But then I also said, but I want to see profit and loss statements for their current fiscal year up until the 31st, before the 31st day of the month before the deadline of the application deadline. The reason why I asked that is because if you projected in your budget to bring in, $100,000 in the year, and then at the end of, we're already 3 months into the fiscal year, and I don't see that you've brought any money in, but you spent a lot of money, and then I don't see from your actual statement from the year prior that you had money going into a rainy day fund, my question is going to be, how are you surviving? So if they're asking about your budget, they're asking about the projections. When they're asking for your actuals, they will say, if they ask for your budget from the prior year, what they are asking you for are your actuals. So when they ask for a budget for a year that has already been completed, they are typically asking for your actuals at the end of your fiscal year. But when they're asking about your current year budget, they are asking for the projection, because you're currently still in the process of raising funds and spending. So you're still in a projection phase. So if they're asking about current year, just to recap, if they're asking about your current year, they're asking about the projection. If they're asking about your budget, to include your budget numbers for the past fiscal year, or two, what they're asking for is what actually happened. So you might have projected to bring in $500,000 and you only brought in $350,000. So they want your actuals on income and they want your actuals on expenses. And you want to make sure that those numbers match your 990s. You want to make sure that those budgets match those actual numbers match your 990s. And so for those of you, I know I've had conversations with some of you on how do you track in-kind donations. Based on your organization and based on in-kind, I recommend that you go to irs.gov and look at what a nonprofit can legally include as an in-kind on their 990. It doesn't mean you can't include that as an actual on your internal budgeting and financial documents, but some in-kind donations cannot be reported to the IRS. Hi, Donna, and I'm not active for a number of reasons. I plan on establishing my 501c3 this year. I'm registered in Texas. Okay, so Donna, if you're just starting out too, you're gonna fill out that 1023. I don't know what's happening now that we are in this coronavirus season, but it should not. Typically, the IRS created that 1023 easy form. And so IRS 501c3 applications typically should take about 3 to 4 weeks now, where before they implemented this easy process, they were taking like 18 months. And so you should not have a lot of challenges getting through that process. But the goal is to get started. If you're going to do it, get started, because the date of the founding date is important for some grant opportunities, some funding opportunities in general. You're not going to be eligible to apply for them until you're at least 3 years old based on your 501c3 certification. So if you're going to do it, you want to make sure you get it done as soon as possible. Let me see, did I miss? Is there a recommend? I answered that one. You're welcome. Regarding notes, have Dania. Are there any more questions that you all have? I want to make sure. Okay, I got another new one. Okay, great. Are there any more questions? Are there any questions based on anything that I shared earlier that you need some clarification on? We have about 18 minutes left. And so if there are other questions around the budget process that I did not even talk about today that you may have, I'm happy to answer them for you all. We have 18 minutes left. And if not, then you can have your 18 minutes back. But again, I'm here to give as much information. And just as a recap, you all, as soon as I scrub through this, I will make this available for you all for the next week. From the day that you get it, I send the email out. You'll have access to it for 7 days. And then after the 7 days, it will be in our portal. It'll be in our portal for everybody else who wants to use it. Just to kind of recap some of the things that we're doing. And so after this, we're going to have a class that we are actually doing for pay. It will be between 6 to 8 weeks, and it will take you through the process and actually developing the numbers. So it's going to be cohort style, a cohort style class. It'll be limited to no more than 10 people. That will be part of the process. There'll be structured lessons. So did you say we should always have a 3 to 5 year strategic plan? Yes, Danita. I would recommend that your first one just do for 3 years. If 3 years is too far out, I would say do it for 2, right? Your very first strategic plan to kind of just say, what are the rules around this process? How do we do the process? At a minimum 2 years. 3 years would be great. I think 5 years, if you've never done a strategic plan before and you're really small organization, I think it might be hard to project 5 years out when you're still trying to put some foundational elements in place. So I would say at least try for 3 years. If you can't do 3, do 2 your first time. And then once you get through that first 2 to 3 years, then your next one you do it for 5. Because then I think you will have had some established goals that you're working towards, strategic goals, and then your annual plan. And then you can say, where do we need to be within the next 5 years to say that we're successful, still working towards our mission, and still developing really great impact. Can you clarify the confusion in expense categories that you spoke of earlier? Yes. And so when it comes to expense categories, there are two things. So when you're developing your budget, you're going to develop your budget based on 3 core category areas. You're going to utilize the chart of accounts, whatever chart of accounts. My recommendation is that you're going to utilize the unified nonprofit chart of accounts. And I will, when I send out the replay, I'm going to include that link for you all. For those of you that have not really put together your chart of accounts nicely, I'll put the link to the unified nonprofit chart of accounts. It's recommended. You can do whatever you want. It's just that the unified chart of accounts, nonprofit chart of accounts, aligns nicely with the 990, and it just makes it easier for reporting purposes. But there are 3 categories when you're doing your unified chart of accounts. There are 3 categories of 3 buckets. The first bucket is going to be your administration. So what income and what expenses. What income is going to come in support of the organization based on administration, and then what expenses are tied to the administration. The second grouping is going to be what income, what expenses are going to be in alignment with each of the So if you have 3 programs, then what are the program expenses? You're going to do each program budget separate from the other, right? It's not all of them together. So you have program A, what expenses are tied to program A? What expenses are tied to program B? justifiable expenses are tied to C. And then if you already have dedicated funding sources for any of them, then when you start doing income, then you'll do what income do you know is already guaranteed, or strong projections for each of the programmatic program A, B, or C. Same thing for your administration. And then the last bucket is going to be your fundraising, which is technically administration, but I like to break fundraising out differently, because we sometimes spend too much money on fundraising and it can become an audit issue. And so you want to make sure that you are clear on how much you're spending on fundraising initiatives. Fundraising initiatives are not programmatic expenses. Fundraising initiatives are just that. They're fundraising initiatives that may benefit program, but an auditor is going to look at it as administrative dollars. And I'll use an example of Kanye West. Kanye West had a foundation years and years and years ago that ended up closing. More than 90% of the funds that were spent in his organization were spent on fundraisers, right? So they weren't even bringing in the money, but they were spending like 90% of their money on fundraisers. And the justification, because they had people running the organization that were not nonprofit professionals, right? I always say, put some respect on the work that nonprofits do. We are driving the economy just like everybody else. But their justification was, we're going to bring in this money, and when we bring in this money, we're going to spend it on these kids. Well, that's not how fundraising works. So the 3 expense categories, you need to be clear on: what do you need to run your organization, the foundation, the house? So that's your administration. You need to be clear on what do you need to run your program. That's the second floor, right? Everything, the program sits on top of everything else. And then the fundraising aspect, which technically is administration. What do we need to be able to bring money into the organization? What kind of resources do we need? So you need to understand your expenses for each of those 3 categories, and you need to know those numbers well. And then you need to be able to project how much money you're going to bring in to offset those expenses. You need to know why these things are needed, and you need to understand why, if what's a want, or again, what's a need, a want, and a wish. Because when you are developing a budget, you're going to put everything down, and then you're going to look at these numbers and go, well, that is way too much money, right? We cannot spend that kind of money. Well, you know, the wants you can't touch, right? You might be able to find better pricing, but the wants you can't touch. The needs you can't touch. The wants you may be able to touch, unless it really enhances the program and the services, and it lends to your strategic plan. But the wishes, you know, it was nice to put it in here, but these wishes don't do anything for us. We can still survive without them. And so you're going to have to cut those out. And so the budget review and approval process is about that. There's a lot of, here's everything that we need, but this is really a lot of money that we need to raise to be able to cover these expenses. So what can we cut back on? So you need to be clear on, what do you need to run program? What do you need to run admin? And what do you need to run your fundraising, fund development initiatives? And I should really use fund development, because a fundraiser is singular. Fund development could be anything from grants to galas to anything that brings in income. And so you want to make sure that you understand what each of those things are, what those categories are, and how you're going to bring in the money. When you are developing your budget, this is kind of going into the class, but I'll just say this: when you're developing a budget, the one thing you're not going to do is say, we can get this for free. It doesn't matter if you can get it for free. That's accounting. When we're talking about budget, I need to know what we need in cash, because if I can't get it for free and this is a need, I need to know how much money it costs. So even if I'm paying $1,000, my rent for an office is $1,000, but they're giving it to me for $100, my budget should still account for $1,000. Because if they change their mind and say we can no longer, and we're talking about, look at everything that's happening right now because of coronavirus. So there could be a landlord that says, I can no longer give you this $900 credit every month. You need to know that $900 extra needs to come out of your bank account every single year. And so you project project to bring in that money, and you're grateful and you're able to save that money if you're getting it in kind. And so you always project for every single cash need, whether or not you can eventually get it for free. Is it true that fundraising expense should be less than 10% of the budget? And so I'm going to say, if we're talking about, Joe, if we're talking about tradition, then the answer is going to be yes. If we're talking about in the real scope of how we make our organizations run well, it is totally unfair to nonprofit organizations to limit fundraising expenses to 10%. Because if I can spend 25% of my budget, but bring in 100% of my budget, then give me some of that leeway. We are still, unfortunately, in a very, very traditional nonprofit cycle. For those of you in North Texas, we are definitely still, in terms of how it operates around us, it's still based on old school tradition. If you all have never seen, I'm going to type his name in, Dan Pallotta's TED Talk before, I recommend Googling Dan Pallotta and look at his TED Talk on the way that we do charities is wrong. It is, I typically, when I do face-to-face training, I typically start off training, if I have enough time, by showing that, especially if we're doing fundraising, because it just opens your eyes to the unfair restrictions on nonprofits, that if this was a corporation, the corporations wouldn't be held to the same standard. And that's why they're able to raise money, because they're able to put their funding into marketing and fundraising dollars, their revenue into fundraising and marketing dollars to bring in the kind of income that they bring in. Dan Pallotta has many case studies where he was able to do that for some large organizations. And because external stakeholders started complaining about it, immediately the nonprofit stopped, and they've never been able to raise as much money as Dan brought in for them in the first year. It really is a great video. What percentage of the program budget should the staff costs stay within? So April, that's a little tricky. So the goal of a charity, a 501c3 specifically, is that you want to spend as much as you can on, program, because the heart of what you do is about program. And so you want to spend as much. The old school rule, I mean, and it's so old school, but the old school rule was that you did not want to spend more than 22 to 23% of your annual budget. So your annual budget, meaning your expenses, on fundraising and administrative related. So that's fundraising and your true admin, non-direct program related expenses should be spent, should be no more than 22 to 23% should be spent on admin as a whole, and that the balance should be spent on program. That rule has kind of gone away, but people still do really look at that 25% mark. So you can spend up to 75%, no less than 75% of your annual income. Your annual expenses should be dedicated to program. There are foundations, there are people that are still very traditional and look at that. I look at the outcomes and some additional things, but when I see someone spending like 50% or anything close to that 40% on admin, and they're not, knocking it out of the park, bringing in like 2-3 times that amount in income, then I question why they exist. And I start to think, did you just create this organization to create salaries for people? Because you're really not here to do the mission-driven work. In light of COVID-19, should we prepare for something like this? Absolutely. So I did a workshop 2 weeks ago on crisis management for startup nonprofits. What do you need to do when something like this happens? Anybody that works with me knows that I have been not predicting coronavirus. I haven't been doing that, but I always talk about, because I've lost $1 million. And so I always talk about the possibility of something happening and overnight you could lose everything. And it's not because you've done anything wrong. It's just because something external that you don't control impacts your ability to bring in money. And we're seeing that now. And the unfortunate part for me, when I look at the sector, is that there's so many nonprofits that do amazing work, especially the smaller organizations that are standing in the gap, that are still providing essential services, where a CEO and executive director is not being paid. Health insurance is also not being given to staff. And then I question, we're still providing essential services. Our employees are not taken care of because they don't have health care. If they get sick, here's another liability for the organization. And so, yes, you should always be preparing for a rainy day fund and a reserve fund. A rainy day fund is miscellaneous. It means that I didn't budget for something in all of these projections that I did. There's this thing that happened that cost $15,000 that we really do need and want. And so, but we did cushion for $25,000 in expenses to spend on things we just didn't budget the exact item for. So that's your rainy day fund. We have this just in case fund within the operating budget that says I can spend up to $25,000 in that year as long as I bring it in and the board approves it. But you should also be preparing for a reserve fund. And a reserve fund says, here's the rainy day fund that we've budgeted for in our budget, but then we have this reserve fund, and a reserve fund should be a minimum of 3 months, but it really should be 6 months. So outside of the budget projections and the money that you need to bring in for this current year, you should also be preparing to have a savings account that has a minimum of 3 months. So how much, on average, how much do you spend every single month? You should have a separate savings account that has a minimum of 3 months of what you spend on average in there, but preferably 6 months. Because on the end of your fiscal year, when this budget projection is done and you start on January 1st, if that's the beginning of your fiscal year, you got to have money to start. Even if you have a budget projection, the organization I was working with, they would always tell me it's in the budget. I was like, but it's not in the bank. Like, being in the bank is what you get to spend. Being in the budget is what you say you want to spend and what you want to bring in. But if you've not brought it in, you can't spend it. And so you want to make sure that there's a separate account that has 3 to 6 months of your average monthly operating expenses. So that something like coronavirus or any other type of emergency, or just so that you can start next year without an emergency, there should be 3 to 6 months. And that should be a process. I don't care how much, if you bring in $5,000 a year right now, you should already be in the process of putting money in a savings account that is dedicated to life after the current fiscal year. So yes, you should do that. And you should also have some level of, and probably by the end of this week, the top 10 things from the call 2 weeks ago will come out. But what you should also have an alignment of this reserve fund, you should also have an emergency response plan that immediately tells you what services get shut down, which ones have to stay. If you have to cut back on something, what services get cut back? Do you furlough people? Do you lay people off? So it kind of outlines what the process is like. And I can't remember if it's FEMA Outlook or if it's CDC, but one of the federal government agencies actually has a really great template for crisis management plans that it's really plug and play, and you can just continue. And I would say with an emergency response plan that you look at that every single year. Like, there's a process to review. Like, when you're doing your budget, I would make a recommendation that you also review your emergency response plan to see if there's anything else. Can you please share a sample budget? So I will try to find a sample budget to provide. What I can provide is a template. For a template, I'll have to look it up, but I can provide a template for you all, an Excel template that outlines like some of the core chart of account areas, and you can add and subtract whatever you need. And then, so the budget template that I have is broken down for January through December for a fiscal year. So not only if there's a salary that needs to be paid, how much does that salary line need to include, and then how much of that salary gets paid every month? Because is remember, when you're doing budgets, you just don't want to say, I need $500,000. You need to know what line item it needs to go in, and you need to know what month you need that money, because your income, your fund development initiatives need to be aligned with that. And so I want to make sure it's at our 90-minute mark. It goes so fast. Are there any more questions for anybody? If you have any, I'll stay on an extra 5 minutes, but I do want to officially close it because it is on the 90-minute mark exactly. You're welcome, Ade. I want to make sure each of you I've answered all of your questions. I want to be respectful of your time. You're welcome, Donna. You're welcome, Joe. This is what I love. And if you don't know anything about me, I love doing budgets. I love talking about budgets. I love building budgets. When does our class start? Terry, our date is going to be revised because of coronavirus. I wanted to start it a few weeks after this one, but I really, out of respect for kind of the issues that are happening with the sector right now, you're welcome, Melanie. I want to make sure that I'm not being tone deaf and starting an entire new process for people that are still trying to figure out how to survive. And so I'm going to take some time between this week and next week and kind of look at my calendar and make some revisions, because I want people to come into this knowing that they can actually go through the process and complete the work with us, and not simply that I'm just starting it to be starting it, and our organizations are not in the right mental space. For those of you that are, for those of you that have to jump off, please feel free to jump off. For those of you that can stay on a few extra minutes, stay on with me, because I want to provide some recommendations, because I was asked about coronavirus and COVID-19, depending on what you call it, and what that really looks like for right now. So for those of you that joined me today, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for trusting me with this information tonight. I hope it was really, really helpful for you. Again, I'm going to scrub this, clean it up. I'll send the link out for you all. You all have 7 days access to go through it, listen to it, take your notes again, and then we'll upload it to our portal for everyone else to use. For those of you that have access to and utilize social media as you're listening to the replay, please feel free to tweet or Facebook or whatever, any of the information that I provided. My job is to serve the community, and this is the way that I'm choosing to do it. And so please make sure that you share if you feel so inclined to do. But again, thank you for allowing me to serve you tonight, and I hope this information was really helpful. For those of you that can stay on for another 5 minutes, I want to share some tips and some information about funding and relief funds that are available for you all. I want to make sure that my small nonprofits are not being left out of this money that's being collected around this country. And in April, you're asking, what is the minimum amount a nonprofit should make before allocating a salary or any income? I think that an executive director should be paid from day one. I don't think that a nonprofit executive director, if you are raising funds to bring it in, then you all need to make sure that you're getting paid. Do not self-sacrifice doing good work in the name of doing it as a volunteer. We have too many people, and if you've worked, anybody that I sit down and I hear, if you cannot pay your full salary, then you make sure that there's a percentage. So say that your salary should be $50,000 a year, but you can raise a quarter of that. Well, you know what? Make sure that that's in the budget. You just say that $50,000 is the actual salary, but for this fiscal year, you're going to bring in, you're only going to be paid a quarter or 50% of that. Get on payroll. It is more important that you get on payroll, because when you are not on payroll, you will continue to work and think, especially if you're a founder, you will continue to work in this space. And this becomes a hobby, and everybody else is getting funding from you, but you're not getting paid for what you're doing. So it does not matter. My only advice when it comes to paying yourself is to be able to raise. So if you're only going to pay yourself 25 to 50% of what you think the salary should be, I would say make sure you raise a minimum of 50 to 75. My true number is 75. Raise 75% of whatever that dollar amount is that you're going to pay yourself or anybody else before you put that person on payroll. The last thing that you want to do is try to raise payroll as the person is there and not be able to pay them. So I always say, try to raise 75% is my safe number. 50 you can do, but 75% for a new position just gives you the flexibility to have a year or 9 months to raise the additional 25%. And it just takes the weight off of your shoulder. And so you want to make sure you can cover all benefits. So payroll, taxes, any benefits that you may offer, plus the salary as well. But there's no minimum amount. You just start allocating. It's more important to get it in the budget, because then your board is used to it being in the budget as well. So thank you for those of you that came on and need to jump off. Good night. But for the remaining 5 minutes, it's now we're 5 minutes over. But for those of you, I don't care where you live. I don't care how long your organization has been in existence. If you have a 501c3, if you are providing services do not have to be these large organizations. I saw one organization that does educational learning after school that now does it online. They have story time online. Well, if you think about all of the parents that are homeschooling right now, everybody wants their child to be able to do something else besides them having to homeschool them. There are relief funds around this country that are being raised by these large foundations. If you are in North Texas, please look at the criteria for North Texas Cares. If you are in New York, look at United Way of New York City, look at their relief funds. I believe the Robin Hood Foundation also has relief funds. You all look at, no matter where you are, look at the relief fund efforts that are being provided. And if there's a grant application, apply for some of these funds. Do not think simply because you're a small organization that you are not qualified. Let them tell you no. Some of the applications are not that long. They are not, and they're not as intrusive as some of the more traditional nonprofits, because the goal, nonprofit grant applications, because the goal right now is to get the money into the hands of the organizations that need it, so these organizations don't close. If you are currently receiving grant funds and those funds were restricted, email or contact your fund, your grant contact at each of those foundations and request that they lift the restrictions on those funds so that you can use it for simple operation. Organizations, our funders are doing that right now. That's the trend. And so if you have gotten $30,000, $10,000 a week ago, a month ago, and those funds can only be used for something that you really can't do right now because of shelter in place and all of these other things, and you just need to make payroll or you just need to pay for expenses, email them this week. Every last funder that you have, money that you already have, money that's on the way, and ask them for leniency and being able to spend those funds in the way that you need to use them to keep your doors open. It's going to be very rare that you're going to hear someone say no, but you have to ask because it has to be in writing. You don't want to spend any money just on basic operations that you've not asked. Can you spend it, use it a different way? So put the request in and allow them to answer you. And once they do that, then now you're free to use those funds the way that you see fit or based on whatever modifications that they've done. Any tips for being a competitive applicant for the relief funds? No, just apply. Be honest. And what I would really say to that, April, is make sure with the relief funds that you are sharing. Number one, if it's to help keep your doors open, be honest about that. We all know that this is a problem, and it's not just a problem for small organizations, it's a problem for large ones as well. And I was having a conversation earlier about for-profit and nonprofit organizations. Right now, when you look at the number of large organizations that are having a hard time keeping their doors open, it really says a lot about finances across the board. So number one, you want to talk about what kind of hardship has been created because of your inability to do your work because of coronavirus. That's number one. And then the second thing I would say, from an innovation perspective, how can those funds be used to benefit community even in a remote way? So if you're providing essential services, but you don't have to physically go outside, say what you can provide to the community and what the benefit is for the community in that. And then if you are still providing services outside because you have to go out, depending upon your organization, then I would say what you need, know, explain to them what you need that for. It could be because of personal protective equipment. It could be to provide, to pay for some additional people to help. You might need people that have lost their job but can do contract work for you. And so just be able to say, one, you need to keep your doors open and be honest about that. But two, how can you continue to serve the community even though you're not able to physically get around? I use one of my clients in San Diego. She founded and runs an organization that provides a holistic approach to sobriety for women of color. And all of their workshops were done in person. Now, all of their workshops are done online. And honestly, I now think that that's the way for her to go, because now she's able to touch an entire country versus just people in her backyard. But she's also, it's been a hardship that how she had to shift, because she's still paying rent on a place that she's not in right now, but at least people are showing up to her classes. So be able to talk about those hardships. Are there expenses that you're still paying for that you have to pay for because you're in a contract? Your landlord has not provided any type of relief. You have membership someplace, maybe you're in a co-working space that still has to be paid, and you don't have any income coming in because you're not able to run programming services. So being competitive for this is about being honest and then saying what you're contributing back to the economy and to the services of the community where it's really needed. But don't leave, great. So don't leave money on the table. Please try, let them tell you no, but no matter where you live, look up, just Google and look for relief funds based on coronavirus for nonprofits and get these applications in. I know with North Texas Cares, it launched last week. They had 500 applications. I think they approved 43 by Friday. And of the 43, I think it was $750,000 that they've already granted. These processes are going fast. So don't spend a lot of time on them like you would do anything else. These are relief funds. Do you recommend? No, I don't. I am not a fan of this entire SBA loan thing for nonprofits at all. I think when we're small and we don't have, we're trying to figure out where our next dollar is going to come from, unless somebody is guaranteeing me that this loan is going to be forgiven, I just think it's going to end up putting our sector in a bad position when it's over. So just be very careful with SBA loans. I would personally not do it for a nonprofit unless it was absolutely necessary. So don't do the loan first, do the relief funds first, go after what's free and you don't have to give it back first. And then look at the SBA loans only as a backup, because from a business perspective, it's needed to survive and there's no other way to do it. So just kind of look at all of the rules around that, and there are plenty of webinars going on all over the country. You can jump on any of them just to hear when people are just digesting the stimulus package and what it means to nonprofits. Read as much as you can before you make the decision to possibly apply for them or not. All right, that's it, good people. I am going to jump off. You're welcome, ma'am. I thank you all for sticking on at almost an extra 15 minutes, and I will get this out to you all as soon as possible. You all stay safe out there. Only go out when it's needed. Practice social distancing. It doesn't matter what the people are saying around you. Just stay away from everybody. Wash your hands, and please continue to be well. And you're welcome, Ade, and you all just keep doing the good work. I just want you all to know that you all are seen. You small organizations, you are seen, you are appreciated. And if anybody, nobody else will tell you, I will fight for small organizations until I can't fight anymore. You are the heart and soul of the nonprofit community. It doesn't matter if we are recognized or not. Continue to do what you do and continue to do it with excellence and continue to build on the things that you're already doing. And I promise you, whatever you think is impossible for you to do as a small organization, I've seen miracles happen, and I've seen small organizations go to big organizations overnight. I've seen small organizations stay small organizations, but stay solid in what they do. and just continue to reach out. If there's anything that I can do for you, please reach out to us at Cause Studio. I'm happy to help. And I'll make sure you all get the information. I know Terry asked about it. I'll make sure you get the information when I look back and revise the budget development program that we're launching on the cohort. I'll make sure that you all get that information first. I typically send it out to people that were in a class like this first, and then I'll open it up to the greater audience. So you all will have that in the next week or two. So you all have a great, great night. Thank you for sticking around with me, and be safe out there. Bye-bye.